be brief. The Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Commerce will now come to order. Today, we will be holding a hearing entitled Legislative Hearing to Protect Consumers and Strengthen our economy and protect our economy. Today, due to the COVID-19 public health emergency, members can participate in today's hearing either in person or remotely via video conferencing in accordance with the updated guidance from the issued by the attending physician. Members, staff, and members of the press who may be in the hearing room are not required to wear a mask For members participating remotely, your microphone will be set on mute for the purpose of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members participating remotely will need to unmute your microphones each time that you wish to speak. Please note that once you are unmuted, anything that you say in WebEx will be heard over the loudspeaker in the committee room and subject to being heard by live stream and C-SPAN. Today, members are participating from different locations and all recognition of members, such as for questions, will be in the order of subcommittee seniority. Documents for the record can be sent to Ed Kazmarski at the end of at the email that has been provided to the staff, and all documents will be entered into the record at the conclusion of the hearing. And to begin, now the chair will recognize herself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. So today, we will consider 9 pieces of bipartisan legislation that will address a wide range of popular, often kitchen table issues. Today, we will consider bills that protect consumers, children, and yes, horses, and strengthen our economy. These bills include the SAFE Act that I introduced with Representative Buchanan. This legislation will protect horses from being slaughtered for human consumption. Horse slaughter is not only inherently cruel, but is also very dangerous. Horse meat can be toxic, and because horses are given drugs that are unregulatedly administered, that can be absolutely toxic to people who would eat that horse meat. And we also have the opportunity to end the abusive practice of horse soring. This horrifying act involves the intentional injury of horses' hooves and legs of performing walking horses. Representatives Cohn, Fitzpatrick, Buchanan, and I are co-sponsors of the PAST Act, which would strengthen protections against horse soring. The Pink Tax Repeal Act, sponsored by Representative Jackie Spear, will end gender bias when it comes to and discrimination, and ensure that women are paying that women are not going to have to pay more for goods and services like household and children's essential items that are virtually identical to those used by men. We have seen everything from diapers and bibs and deodorants and probiotics that are significantly marked up when advertised for women and girls and even baby girls. The visitor, the Visit America Act, introduced by Representative Titus, Case, and the late great Don Young, as well as the Travel and Tourism Act, led by Representatives Dunn, Soto, and Salazar, will booster our travel and tourist industry, which we certainly want to do at this time. Legislation by Representatives Dean and Armstrong will offer consumers a convenient and accessible way to safely navigate the notarization procedure remotely. Legislation from Representatives Kelly, Arrington, and Liu will protect children from deadly batteries that can be easily ingested. Reese's Law is named to honor in the honor of Reese Hamsmith, the Reese Hamsmith, the daughter of our courageous witness today, Trista, who will share her story with us. And I thank her for being here. I look forward to moving Reese's Law to ensure that no parent must come before the subcommittee again because they have lost their child because of a dangerous product. So if I just could end here together, these bills will make Americans' daily lives safer and easier and help grow our economy. So I thank the witnesses that are here today for joining us. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Bilirakis, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to wish you a happy 39th birthday.
Yeah, exactly.
I got that right. Thank you again for holding this legislative hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for sharing your expertise today. I look forward to hearing you. There's a lot to cover with the broad scope of bills on the docket, so we appreciate all of you speaking with us today, albeit virtually. Before jumping into the list in front of us, this subcommittee has a lot of bills, 37 to be specific, in post-legislative hearing limbo that have yet to receive a markup. I know a lot of our members on this side of the aisle are anxiously waiting to hold a meeting, and I'm sure on the other side as well, to further discuss some of those bills and work across the aisle to make bipartisan progress. I'm hopeful we can move forward with actual legislative action on those bipartisan bills uh, and leave the partisan ones to the wayside. Onto the subject again at hand, I'm pleased to see bipartisan bills included in today's hearing, like H.R. 7820, the Travel and Tourism Act, and introduced by my friends in the Florida delegation, Representative Dunn, Representative Soto, and Representative Salazar, and I'm fully supportive of their efforts. I'm also glad to see the Visit America Act that my colleague and fellow Travel and Tourism co-chair, Dina Titus, sponsors, which I know also tackles broader issues for the industry beyond this committee's jurisdiction. This subcommittee has a rich history of coming together in the name of promoting America's travel and tourism industry, and after the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, this legislation urgently shows, again, the need for this industry to be a focus point for the Department of Commerce. As you all know, our committee unanimously passed the Restoring Brand USA legislation, which will release dollars already collected for the program to help restore our travel and tourism industry back to even better than the pre-pandemic levels. HR 7820 will further assist the travel and tourism industry by requiring the Department of Commerce to develop a 10-year travel and tourism strategy with annual goals for the number of international visitors to the United States. I believe this legislation complements the committee's previous efforts, and I look forward to seeing the bill move forward. The committee is also considering legislation to provide greater transparency to our constituents with H.R. 4081, the Informing Consumers About Smart Devices Act, introduced by Representative Curtis and Representative Moulton. Holding big tech accountable has been a priority for Republicans, for Leader Rogers throughout this Congress, and I believe this legislation will help us move forward accomplishing this particular goal. In the wake of advancements in technology, increasingly more innovative devices are being developed and deployed into our economy that have cameras or microphones. I'm certain every member here on the dais has at least one or two smart TVs or speakers in their homes. I know I do. This legislation would simply require companies that manufacture devices with these cameras and microphones to disclose to consumers of such features. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. Unfortunately, I'm not able to cover all the bills in today's docket in 5 minutes. But I did want to raise one final bill that is important to a founding principle of this subcommittee, which is protecting consumers. Our subcommittee has jurisdiction over the Consumer Protection Safety Commission, an independent organization whose mission is to protect people against risks of injuries and deaths associated with consumer products. We owe it to our constituents to examine whether there are dangerous products in the marketplace and actions we need to take without creating loopholes for bad actors or unduly burdening those that follow the law. That's why I'm proud to support Reese's law, which will require the CPSC to develop product safety standards with respect to batteries that pose an ingestion hazard. I want to share my sympathy to Trista Hamsmith on the loss of dear Reese. And thank you for being with us today to share your story. You will make a difference. And for the countless hours that you have dedicated to the bipartisan legislation brought before the day. Again, Madam Chair, I'll yield back the balance of my time and appreciate you giving me the time.
The gentleman yields back, and now I yield 5 minutes to the chair of the full committee, Frank Pallone.
Thank you, Chairwoman Schakowsky. And today we'll discuss several bipartisan bills that would strengthen our economy, protect both consumers and horses. We're going to discuss two bills that will help strengthen our economy by boosting the travel and tourism industry. It's very important to my district, an industry that desperately is trying to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The Visit America Act and the Travel and Tourism Act both call on the Department of Commerce to develop and implement a pandemic recovery strategy for the travel and tourism industry. We also have a bill to further enhance our nation's manufacturing sector. Today, there's no centralized repository of information about the various federal programs supporting manufacturing. The Manufacturing.gov Act changes that by requiring the Department of Commerce to ensure that the Manufacturing.gov website serves as the primary hub for information relating to federal manufacturing programs. We also consider legislation that will protect consumers, as I mentioned. Reese's Law, a bill named after Reese Hamsmith, an 18-month-old baby who tragically died after ingesting a button cell battery. These batteries are very small, the size of a button, and are found in common household electronics like television remotes, key fobs, and meat thermometers. They have been shown to cause serious injury and death to children who swallow them. Reese's Law directs the Consumer Product Safety Commission to establish mandatory safety standards to protect children from ingesting button cell batteries. We're so grateful that Reese's mother, Trista, is here today to share her story. Her advocacy has no doubt saved lives, and this bill will save more. We also examine legislation to address the far too common practice of charging women higher prices than men for identical products and services. The so-called pink tax is simply not fair and has to stop. The bipartisan Pink Tax Repeal Act would do that. It prohibits the selling of substantially similar consumer products and services at different prices based on gender. And the bill also puts violators on the hook for civil penalties. Then we have the bipartisan Informing Consumers About Smart Devices Act that would require that manufacturers of devices connected to the internet that have cameras or microphones inform consumers that those cameras or microphones are part of the device. No one should be surprised to learn if their electronic device has the ability to record them. The bill also gives the Federal Trade Commission the authority to punish violators. And we're also consider the Securing and Enabling Commerce Using Remote and Electronic Notarization Act, and that establishes nationwide standards and technical requirements for remote online notarization. This bill will transition notarization to the 21st century without sacrificing security, making the process more convenient and safer for the American public. And finally, but certainly last but not least, two bills that would end horrendous practices and intolerable abuses suffered by horses. I have a maid back in my district called Monmouth Park, and my home county is very much horse country. Since 2015, hundreds of thousands of horses have been exported from the United States to Canada and Mexico for slaughter for human consumption. And despite a national ban, the practice of soring, applying an irritating or blistering agent to a limb of a horse to accentuate the horse's gait, continues. So the SAFE Act and the PAST Act will address unfortunate gaps in our animal welfare laws that have left these innocent animals far too vulnerable. So I look forward to the discussion. I yield the time left, a minute and a half, to Representative Kelly, Vice Chair of the full committee.
Thank you, Chairman Pallone, and thank you, Chairwoman Schakowsky and Ranking Member Bilirakis, for having this hearing today and including Reese's Law. Reese's Law, as you've heard, is named after Reese Hamsmith. A young child passed away in December of 2020 after complications from swallowing a button battery. And I thank her mom, Trista, for being here virtually today to share her story. I first met Trista last fall when she approached my office with an idea for a bill. She shared Reese's story with me, and as a mother and grandmother, I knew we had to do something. More than 3,000 children ingest button batteries every year. The health impacts of swallowing can be severe and in many cases result in death. These instances are on the rise, and addressing this issue cannot wait any longer. That is why I introduced Reese's Law, which will require the Consumer Product Safety Commission to create safety standards for button cell and coin batteries that prevent accidental ingestion by children 6 years old and younger. Fortunately, after months of hard work and Trista working tirelessly to share her story and get support for the bill, I'm excited to be having this hearing and look forward to working with Trista and the committee to make this bill law. And I'll just say really quickly, since we are consumer protection, I hope at some point we can do something to protect so many of our children and people from guns. Thank you, and I yield back.
And now I yield back, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back, and now I recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for participating. We are here today to tackle a variety of challenges and several proposed solutions to protect people and ensure America's economic leadership. That includes a number of solutions addressing the challenges and lessons learned from the pandemic. I'm pleased to see bipartisan legislation at today's hearing, like Mr. Armstrong's bill to add permissions for remote notary, and Mr. Curtis's bill, which requires companies to clearly indicate when home devices may be able to watch or listen to you. The pandemic also highlighted the need for more resiliency in critical industries like travel and tourism, the gig economy, and services industries so that they can rebound quickly after future disruptions. Our subcommittee Republican leader, Gus Bilirakis's bipartisan Brand USA travel and tourism bill, signed into law this year, would do just that. Mr. Dunn's legislation, along with Mr. Soto and Ms. Salazar, also focuses on solutions to pandemic-era challenges experienced by the tourism industry to rebound from the pandemic. On a much more serious note, we'll also be discussing Reese's Law, which will help prevent accidental ingestion of button cell and coin batteries by children. I want to join in saying thank you to Reese's mom, Trista Hamsmith, who's here today. As a mom, I admire your leadership and your strength to share your daughter's story with us and to save lives with Reese's Law. Your courage and your leadership is making a difference. Thank you also to Robin Kelly for introducing this bipartisan legislation. As the former Republican leader of this subcommittee, I know the importance of having the Consumer Product Safety Commission focus on protecting people, especially children. And I applaud Chair Schakowsky's leadership in this important issue. I also look forward to hearing about other bills on the agenda today that will impact manufacturing, retail, and horses. We have a lot to discuss to ensure these bills have the intended outcomes without producing unintended burdens or consequences. It's important to note this subcommittee also has a few dozen post-legislative hearing bills waiting to move out of committee. So we have our work cut out for us on deciding which bills are best positioned to move. With the challenges that Americans and businesses are going through right now, I caution against enacting legislation that will ultimately make things worse. The so-called pink tax repeal is not something that I see a clear path for. It would make the supply chain crisis worse, reduce diversity of goods and services, and eliminate choices that men and women may have different preferences on. We don't need any more empty shelves. Our focus should be on how we incentivize female entrepreneurship, rather than the government putting its heavy hand on how to set prices with more regulations. I know we'll have a robust debate today, so I look forward to discussing and learning more on all of the solutions before you. Thank you to my colleagues for their hard work. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. And now I would like to introduce our witnesses for today's hearing. First, let me introduce Caitlin Kraska, who is the Director of Federal Legislation and Government Affairs at the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Michael O'Brien is the Vice President of Corporate Underwriting at First American Title Trust, American Title Insurance Company. Brian Hagopian is the CEO and President at Pilot, let's see. It's,
Pilot Precision.
Okay, Pilot Precision, Precision's products, sorry, Mr. Hagopian. Julie Menon is the former commissioner at New York City's Department of Consumer Affairs, and Hadley Heath Mannon is vice president for policy and at Independent Women's Forum. Tori Barnes is executive vice president of public affairs and policy at United States Travel Association, and Trista Hamsmith, that you've heard much about, who is Reese's mom and founder of Reese's Purpose. At this time, the chair will recognize each of our witnesses for 5 minutes to provide their opening statement. Before I do so, let me just mention the system with our clock, so that the witnesses will know when to begin to end their remarks. There is a timer on your screen that will count down your remaining time. As the time reaches the 1 minute mark, please begin to wrap up as much as you can, wrap up your testimony. So, Ms. Kraska, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Wonderful. Happy birthday, Congresswoman. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Schakowsky, Ranking Member Bilrakis, and honorable members of the subcommittee for inviting me to testify in support of the Save America's Forgotten Equines Act and the Prevent All Soaring Tactics Act. Special thanks to Chair Schakowsky and Rep. Buchanan for their leadership on the SAFE Act and the long list of bipartisan leaders of the past act. These two bills are critical to protecting horses in this country and the people who love them. My name is Katie Kraska. I'm the Director of Federal Legislation for the ASPCA. It's a special honor for me to be here because I grew up in Kentucky and horses have always been a big part of my life. The ASPCA was the first animal welfare organization on this continent, founded in 1866 on a mission to protect equines. Since then, we've developed innovative programs working closely with adoption organizations and the equine industry to ground solutions in science. We have a simple yet ambitious goal, that all horses have good welfare. This goal is impossible to achieve without passage of the SAFE Act and the PAST Act, bills to finally end the slaughter of American horses for human consumption and horse soring, which is the intentional injuring of a horse's legs to induce an unnaturally high stepping gait. First, Congress has already acted to end these cruel practices, shuttering horse slaughterhouses in 2007 and voting annually to keep them closed. Soring was banned with passage of the Horse Protection Act in 1970. But loopholes have allowed American equines to be exported to other countries for slaughter and horse soring to persist largely because of industry self-policing. This is not what Congress had in mind. We need to pass these bills to finally finish what Congress started years ago. Second, the public has made their opposition to this cruelty abundantly clear. A poll released this year found a bipartisan 83% of American voters want to end the slaughter of American equines. The equine community wants to end horse slaughter. Hall of Fame jockeys and trainers, well-respected veterinarians, and industry leaders like the Jockey Club, the U.S. Trotting Association, Breeders' Club, the Stronach Group, recently joined us to announce the Final Stretch Alliance to End Horse Slaughter. Every single animal protection group and over 400 equine rescues support these bills. Finally, we see this overwhelming support because horse slaughter is bad for business, it's bad for the equine community, and it's bad for the equines themselves. Equine industries are built on public perception. Industry has already stepped up to provide aftercare options, resources, safety net services for horses in their care. But as long as horse slaughter is legal, they will continue to slip through the cracks. And as long as they end up there, industry will not have the public's trust. Horse slaughter also strikes fear in the hearts of anyone trying to rehome their horse, distorting markets and putting welfare at risk. It incentivizes predatory behavior when kill buyers pose as good homes but sell horses into the slaughter pipeline, and it drains the resources of rescues having to compete with kill buyers. And to be clear, when I say the slaughter pipeline, I mean a 28-plus-hour journey packed with other unfamiliar animals in a trailer, often enduring horrific injury or even death along the way. This is a fate that no one would want for their horse. It's a fate that no vet would ever prescribe for a horse. It's cruelty, and there's no reason for it to continue. Between food safety concerns over the toxic drugs and chemicals present in American horse meat and the equine community's hard work to rehome and adopt horses, we've seen a massive drop in the number of American horses exported for slaughter in recent years. We also know that there are 2.3 million Americans that are interested and able to adopt a horse right now. Compare this to the 23,000 horses that were exported for slaughter last year. There are homes for horses for decades. But the truth is that no amount of aftercare or adoption work or responsible owners could prevent American horses from going to slaughter. We're trying. But as long as export is legal, owners will be scared, horses will suffer, and industry will be at risk. The SAFE Act is the only solution that will finally keep horses and the equine community safe. Similarly, for the sake of the horses undergoing horrific torture and the integrity of this part of the show industry, we must enact the PAST Act. This bill would bring long-needed updates to the Horse Protection Act, ensuring that its true intent is achieved and that no more horses ever endure a life full of extreme pain and suffering. These bills are both unfinished business for Congress, and they will protect horses, their owners, and the horse industry. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien, you are now recognized.
Chairman Pallone, Ranking Member McMorris-Rogers, Subcommittee Chairwoman Schakowsky, and Ranking Member Bilirakis, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Michael O'Neill. I'm Vice President of Corporate Underwriting at First American Title, and I'm here on behalf of the American Land Title Association. Over the past 5 years, I've assisted dozens of states in updating their notary laws to allow for the use of remote online notarization, and I'm honored for the opportunity to speak to you today. Notaries are perhaps easily overlooked, but they are critically important to our economy, especially for real estate. Notaries have been with us for a very long time, and in fact, they go all the way back to the Roman Empire. So why do we continue to use notaries? It's because they're proven to increase the security of life's most critical transactions by authenticating a document signer's identity and by serving as an impartial witness. The Secure Notarization Act is a bipartisan bill thanks to the leadership of Representatives Armstrong and Dean. It modernizes notary law for the 21st century by allowing documents to be securely notarized over a webcam or a smartphone. We call this remote online notarization. Remote notarization benefits and protects consumers. It gives them the flexibility to execute documents based on their schedules without the need to take time off work and find a babysitter. As you might imagine, the biggest driver of remote notarization has been the COVID-19 pandemic. As of today, 40 states and counting authorize the use of remote notarization. But a national solution is needed to provide this valuable flexibility to every American, including those who need it most, like service members, others who are overseas, and underserved communities. Furthermore, the country's legal landscape would benefit from additional certainty around the acceptance of remote notarization. Congress is best positioned to provide this certainty, just as it did for electronic signatures with the enactment of the eSign Act more than 2 decades ago. The Secure Notarization Act does 3 basic things. First, it permits all consumers to have access to remote notary services. Imagine anyone being able to close on a home from the comfort and convenience of the kitchen table. Second, the bill creates national minimum consumer protections. This includes using multi-factor authentication for determining a document signer's identity, tamper-evident technology so you can detect any changes made to an electronic document after it's been executed, and an audio-video recording of the notarization. This both deters fraud and provides strong evidence in court if there's a dispute. Finally, the Secure Notarization Act provides certainty around the interstate recognition of remotely notarized documents. This ensures Americans' legal documents will be valid and enforceable nationwide, no matter where they were signed, just as is the case today with any traditional in-person notarization. Equally important to what the Secure Notarization Act does is what it doesn't do. States will continue to commission and regulate notaries. They're free to add standards above the minimum consumer protections. The Act also works in tandem with existing state privacy laws to protect consumer data. And finally, the Act does not favor or restrict the use of specific technologies. Today, the country stands at an inflection point with remote notarization. Just as Congress acted decisively to enable online commerce by enacting eSign, now is the time to do the same for notarizations. So I'll leave you with a quote from a service member who recently used remote notarization for a home purchase. I am stationed overseas in South Korea. My closing happened nearly 7,000 air miles and 13 time zones away. Closing on the house would have been impossible without this option. Our dream house would have slipped away from us had we not been able to execute the buy remotely. Thank you for inviting me to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. And now I will, and now Mr. Hagopian, I'm so sorry I messed up the name of your company. You'll introduce yourself, and I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Sikowski and Ranking Member Bilirakis and those committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the subcommittee in support of Manufacturing.gov Act today. My name is Eric Hagopian. I'm the owner and CEO of Pilot Precision Products located in Western Massachusetts, in South Deerfield near Amherst, about 2 hours east of Boston, or west of Boston, rather. I founded Pilot Precision Products in 2016, but our roots date back to 1945 when the Dumont Company was established to manufacture broaching tools in the area, which was also home to many other industrial cutting tool companies, such as Greenfield, Tap and Die, Bendix, and others. My small business employs about 35 highly skilled machinists. We manufacture and distribute precision broaching tools and other hole-making tools for the aerospace, defense, automotive, medical, and medical industries, to name a few. Broaching is a metal cutting operation that uses a multi-tooth tool called a broach to change a round hole into a desired shape, such as a square, hex, spline, or any other form used in mechanical drive components. Materials such as steel and aluminum are very prevalent. I also serve on the executive committee of the National Tooling and Machining Association based in Cleveland, Ohio. And I'm speaking today on their behalf, and of course, on behalf of the thousands of small and medium-sized manufacturing companies across the country, like Pilot Precision Products. As the past 2 years have shown, manufacturing in America is crucial to our economic and national security interests. During the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, most U.S. manufacturing businesses were deemed essential. We kept our doors open and lights on, producing the products Americans need to keep our communities safe. No matter what, manufacturers are always there for Americans. Now manufacturers need our government to be there for us. We work hard to compete on an uneven global playing field. Time and again, we're up against foreign government subsidized companies. And although U.S. government has programs to help improve our competitiveness, they're often difficult to find and certainly to navigate. I'm fortunate in that I have an active trade association to support me, but thousands of other manufacturing business owners see the federal government as too big to help and too difficult to be effective. The truth is that manufacturing touches virtually every part of the federal government. From job training programs to advanced manufacturing initiatives, our sector can benefit from programs at the Department of Commerce, Labor, Energy, Defense, and Transportation. The Government Accountability Office recently found that 58 federal programs across 11 federal agencies exist to support manufacturing. And this is the problem. These programs are so scattered across so many different agencies and departments. According to that same GAO report, 11 programs are at the Commerce Department alone. But one must search all different parts of the department to find them, and that's why we need the Manufacturing.gov Act. The Commerce Department should be the best go-to resource for all things related to industry. Right now, I must know what a program is called and where to look for it, and then try and back down the program content. But what if I didn't know that there's a program that exists that could benefit my business? How would I learn about it without the support of my industry association? We need a one-stop shop where manufacturers can quickly go to learn about programs that are already funded and available. By passing the Manufacturing.gov Act and establishing a section of the Manufacturing.gov website with information about federal manufacturing programs, our business can quickly identify how we can invest our dollars back into our business and community and industry. The bill places focus on providing more information and resources available in all areas top of mind to manufacturers like us. Having links and information on programs available to our small business in one place would not only save time, but allow us to identify and benefit from other existing programs. The topics under the Manufacturing.gov Act, such as workforce training, supply chain technology, research and development, and trade are all very central to our business. Frankly, when I first heard about the Manufacturing.gov Act, I was somewhat surprised, thinking that something like this must already exist. But a connected, centralized hub to manufacturers with federal manufacturing programs seems just like a common sense approach that would help us to benefit programs already designed and funded to support manufacturing in America. But knowing about the programs is only the first step. Small businesses often lack resources and know how to apply to go about applying and then implementing these necessary steps. This is where the industry trade groups such as the National Tooling and Machining Association can partner with the federal government and other stakeholders to increase awareness of the programs and provide initial support. Manufacturers are always there for this country, innovating, creating, powering, and growing our economy, but we're facing many challenges from worker shortages to supply chain disruptions. Passing the Manufacturing.gov Act will ensure that our government can be there for us. With a one-stop hub for manufacturers, the U.S. government can help businesses like mine identify existing programs that could benefit our company and our industry. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. And on behalf of myself and the National Tooling and Machining Association of the industry, I encourage you to pass the Manufacturing.gov. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Next, I recognize Julie Menon, who, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Julie Menon, and I'm testifying before you today as the former commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you, Chair Chakowski, Ranking Member Bilirakis, and distinguished members of the subcommittee for inviting me to speak today as a witness. I know this committee is doing critical work to protect American consumers across the country. In this difficult environment for today's consumers, it is imperative that lawmakers do everything they can to promote equity, transparency, and affordability for the American consumer. One law that will do just that is the Pink Tax Repeal Act, the bill that I'm going to be focusing my testimony on today. I've done extensive work in the arena of consumer products. Before I began my career in public service, I worked as a regulatory attorney, first at Wiley Ryan and Fielding in Washington, D.C., where I specialized in consumer protection issues. I then worked as senior regulatory attorney at Colgate-Palmolive Company in New York City, where I handled regulatory legal matters for the agency encompassing the Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, and other regulatory issues and consumer litigation. Through this experience, I saw firsthand that although there might be two products that were very similar, there was a bent to market them differently. In 2014, I was appointed commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. In 2015, as commissioner, I used this prior experience I had to spearhead a large study investigating the gender pricing of goods in New York City. The goal of the study was to determine the frequency and extent to which female consumers face higher prices than male consumers when literally buying the exact same products. We understood that the study needed to be precise in the data it collected and needed to cast a wide net around consumer life cycle. We ultimately examined 794 staple consumer goods across 5 industries: children's toys and accessories, children's clothing, adult clothing, personal care products, and senior healthcare products. Each product category was selected to reflect a stage of the consumer life cycle, thereby providing a glimpse into the experiences of consumers of all types and all ages. While the study focused on New York City markets, many of the stores and brands that we examined were in fact top national chain retailers. We also understood that to get the most accurate results, it was critical to minimize differences between the men's and women's items that we were comparing. The agency only selected products that had similar male and female versions and were closest in branding, ingredients, appearance, textile, construction, and/or marketing. When the researchers came back with the results, it was very clear that we were not looking at a case of occasional overpricing. Rather, we saw that 42% of the time, women are charged an average of 7% more for what is ostensibly the exact same product. So, for example, women's jeans were 10% more than virtually identical men's products of the exact same size and make. Girls' helmets and pads cost 13% more than boys' helmets and pads. Razors and razor cartridges cost 11% more for women. Over and over and over again, we saw a significant markup for products aimed for women and girls. I remember one particularly egregious case where a boy's scooter that was colored red cost $25 from Target. The girl's scooter was double the price, and the only difference is that it was painted pink. What our findings suggested was that over the course of their lives, women are paying thousands of dollars more to purchase similar products as men. These higher prices are mostly unavoidable for women and permeate many different types of products they buy. Individual consumers do not have control over the textile and ingredients that are used in products marketed to them and must make purchasing choices based on only what is available in the marketplace. We conducted this study to raise public awareness about pricing disparities so consumers could make the most educated shopping choices. However, the burden should not be on the consumer to have to ferret out this type of discriminatory practice. The burden must be on the manufacturer and the retailer to do the right thing. An educated consumer can call out brands and diligently check and compare prices, but they really shouldn't have to. And that it's basically time and energy that a woman is being forced to put on solely because of her gender. All consumers deserve a marketplace in which they don't have to conduct an investigation to ensure that they're getting a fair price. For this reason, we need authorities to step in and enforce fair practices. Gender-based pricing is not indigenous to just New York City, of course. It's happening all over the country. This issue is compounded by the fact that women are still, on average, being paid 83 cents on the dollar to men. They're earning less, but being charged more for everyday basic products. In order to combat gender inequality in our country, it's essential to take stronger action against this widespread and unfair practice. The bill that this committee is considering would do just that. And by passing this bill, this committee would provide significant relief for consumers. And I would just say in closing, I really appreciate the honor to be able to be here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee has. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'll recognize Hadley Heath Mannon.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Hadley Heath Manning, Vice President for Policy at Independent Women's Forum, a nonprofit organization dedicated to developing and advancing policies that aren't just well-intended, but actually enhance people's freedom, opportunities, and well-being. Thank you, Madam Chair Schakowsky, for the invitation to serve as a witness at this hearing today, and happy birthday to you. I appreciate the work of this subcommittee to find bipartisan solutions to help reduce costs for American consumers and families who are struggling during this time of record high inflation. However, my testimony will focus on one proposed bill that will not be helpful. The proposed repeal of the so-called pink tax may be well-intended, but it will result in fewer choices and reduce consumer satisfaction. First, we should clarify that the pink tax isn't a tax at all. If it were, I would be in favor of repealing it. But the term refers not to a government levy, but to the disparity in pricing between products marketed to men versus women. Some women's products and services, most notably those oriented to personal care and hygiene, cost more than similar products made and marketed to men. One well-known and frequently cited report that we just heard a lot about from the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs found that women's products on average cost 7% more than men's. But, and this is critically important, a disparity isn't always evidence of discrimination. In this case, the disparity actually represents diversity. The robust, free, and capitalist American marketplace is capable of providing millions of products that are customized to the diverse American population. This is something to celebrate, not squelch. Importantly, women are free to buy products marketed to either sex. Either men's and women's products like shampoo, face wash, razors, and deodorant are substitute goods, or they are not. If they are, women and men are savvy enough as consumers to choose what they want based on the product and the price point. Women make 85% of consumer brand decisions and are capable of navigating this marketplace. In fact, when a writer for Mike.com bought all men's beauty products instead of women's, she saved about $24 over the course of 1 week. Nothing is stopping any American woman from doing this. No law is needed to make these more affordable men's beauty products available to us. However, the reason many women do not buy men's or gender-neutral products is because in many cases these goods are not substitutes. Therefore, it's not appropriate to compare the prices of products that are substantially different. Even the study out of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs says explicitly that men's and women's products are rarely identical, making exact comparisons difficult. Often men and women's products are so different that the cost of production alone can explain the difference in price. For example, men and women's personal care products often have a different mix of active and inactive ingredients. They often smell different and have different features. Even when it comes to services, such as dry cleaning, there are different costs on the supply side. Men's shirts can often be machine pressed. Women's blouses often cannot. This saves the dry cleaner time and money, and he passes along these savings to male dry cleaning customers. The pink tax is not just a function of supply costs, but also a function of demand. Despite higher costs, women demonstrate a preference for goods that are made and marketed for them. Some goods are truly identical except for the color, and as the mother of 2 young girls and 1 young boy, I can tell you that often my girls prefer the pink or sparkly version of whatever toy or product their brother has. Now, we can speculate and debate about the reasons why boys and girls have different preferences, but that might be beyond the scope of this hearing. Instead, today, we can simply observe that these preferences exist and that no consumer protection is needed to keep Americans from demonstrating those preferences in the marketplace. Referring to the preferences of female customers as a pink tax may actually shortchange some smart and socially conscious choices that many women are making. According to a study by the global management consulting firm Kearney, female consumers value female focused products, pro women branding and advertising, and socially conscious companies with female leadership. No one could or should blame female consumers who prefer to pay a little bit more when a brand or product speaks to their core identity as women or allows them to support a cause that they believe in. Attempts to repeal the pink tax would have unintended consequences. Prohibiting disparate pricing for products geared toward men and women ignores the supply and demand factors that I have discussed here today. The result would be that producers would simply standardize products, eliminating sex-specific options that women and men value and prefer. This would reduce the diversity of goods and services available and reduce consumer satisfaction. A robust marketplace provides a broad spectrum of goods and services. The choice among different goods and services should belong to consumers. In some more socialized countries, consumers have fewer options. Rather than having our choice of more than 75 different brands of shampoo, we could arrive at the personal care aisle only to find the shampoo or the soap. We are blessed to live in a country where the market is free to respond to the preferences of so many different types of consumers. We have organic shampoo, shampoo for black hair, kids shampoo, shampoo for curly hair, flat hair, hair that's been permed or dyed. We have a variety of choice, and naturally, prices vary according to product. Sadly, today in the US, due to supply chain issues and shortages, the specter of empty shelves is not a far off concern. This is the matter that should hold the attention of lawmakers, not proposed restrictions like the pink tax repeal that, rather than offering consumers protection, would take products away. The problems that undergird so many of our economic problems today, making it harder and harder for American consumers to afford basic necessities, are the result of needless government regulation and meddling. The attempt to eliminate the so-called pink tax and standardize pricing by fiat would be another step in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Madam Chair, you have to unmute.
Thought I had, I'm sorry. Tori Barnes, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Schakowsky, Ranking Member Bilirakis, and members of the subcommittee. Good afternoon. I'm Tori Emerson Barnes, Executive Vice President for Public Affairs and Policy for the U.S. Travel Association. And thank you for inviting the travel industry to participate in today's hearing. Before I start, I'd like to thank Ranking Member Bilirakis for his leadership on the Restoring Brand USA Act, and Chairwoman Schakowsky and members of the subcommittee, as well as Chairman Pallone and Ranking Member McMorris-Rodgers for supporting its enactment. These two bills being considered today are a continuation of the work on Brand USA and exemplify this committee's ongoing bipartisan engagement on travel and tourism issues. The Visit America Act and the Travel and Tourism Act would both support the economic recovery and long-term competitiveness of America's travel and tourism industry. While both bills contain similar provisions, there are also some key omissions in the Travel and Tourism Act, and we look forward to working with this committee to address those. The Visit America Act is a bipartisan bill with strong support across the travel industry. There is also companion legislation in the Senate led by Senator Sullivan, and the act is included in the Senate's bipartisan Travel and Tourism Omnibus Bill Act of 2021. First, the most important, the bill establishes an Assistant Secretary of Travel and Tourism at the Department of Commerce. The Assistant Secretary would provide high-level leadership accountable to Congress that would work effectively across the administration to develop and implement national travel policies. Because travel touches so many areas of government, from DHS, TSA, and CBP to the Department of State, DOT, FAA, and more, a senior federal official is needed to more effectively coordinate policies across the administration. It's also important to note that the U.S. is the only G20 country without a federal agency or cabinet level official in charge of tourism policy. Establishing an assistant secretary would put the U.S. on par with the other top destinations for international travel and provide a high-level official to work with other countries on travel facilitation issues. Second, the Visit America Act directs the Department of Commerce to develop a COVID-19 recovery strategy. At the end of 2021, international travel spending was 78% below pre-pandemic levels, while business travel spending was down 56%. This provision ensures that the federal government develops and implements a plan to quickly restore travel, rebuild our workforce, and prepare for future pandemics. Third, the Visit America Act directs the Department of Commerce to consistently set national goals and strategies to grow travel to and within the U.S. The bill also charges the Assistant Secretary with carrying out the strategies on an annual basis. We'd like to thank Secretary Raimondo for her work to develop a national travel and tourism strategy for the next decade. She has been a very strong advocate for our industry's recovery and future competitiveness. Unfortunately, the same type of leadership has been very inconsistent across administrations. The Visit America Act would ensure that the national travel and tourism strategies are consistently developed and carried out from administration to administration. Finally, the Visit America Act directs the Assistant Secretary to work with the International Trade Administration and the U.S. Commercial Services to promote and facilitate U.S. bids for large international trade shows and events. The Department of Commerce provides export promotion and trade facilitation services for other U.S. exports, like transportation equipment and manufactured goods. But the department does not consistently do the same to help U.S. destinations compete for large international events and trade shows, despite the fact that international inbound travel is historically our nation's second largest industry export. This is a crucial provision to ensure that the U.S. does not miss out on major international events, which generate substantial economic impact for local communities. For example, U.S. Travel will host IPW, the leading international travel trade show, next week in Orlando. Past IPWs have generated an estimated $28.9 billion in export spending in the U.S., which is equivalent to exporting 69 Boeing 747s, 700 GE9X engines, or nearly 58,000 John Deere combines. This demonstrates international travel's substantial economic power and shows why it should be prioritized along the other U.S. exports. Next, I'd like to turn to the Travel and Tourism Act, which includes many of these same provisions, including the development of COVID recovery strategy and direction for the Department of Commerce to set national travel and tourism strategies at least once every 10 years. However, the bill is missing two critical policies. First, the bill does not establish an assistant secretary for travel and tourism. And second, the bill does not direct the Secretary of Commerce to support and facilitate U.S. bids for large international trade shows, conferences, and events. In our view, these are two important and impactful policies, both of which are within the committee's jurisdiction. We want to thank Representatives Titus, Case, Dunn, Soto, and Salazar for their work on these bills, on these critical bills for recovery and competitiveness. We hope that the work the bill sponsors in this committee can do to amend the Travel and Tourism Act to include similar provisions so that both bills can move forward. Thank you for your time and for your strong support, continued support of the travel and tourism industry.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, I am going to introduce Hamsmith. We know this is not easy for you, and we are so appreciative for your coming here. Reese's mom, you have 5 minutes for your statement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Trista Hamsmith, and I'm here to share why enacting legislation to make consumer products that use button batteries safer is so important, and to press upon you why time is of the essence. Button batteries are a hidden hazard to young children, elderly, and pets, and I'm here today to implore you to protect families from what mine suffered through just a year and a half ago. My daughter, Reese Elizabeth Hamsmith, known affectionately to those closest to her as Riri, born a spunky, sassy, full of life girl on June 13th of 2019. At an early age, Reese took the attention of the entire room when she walked in with her inquisitive spirit and demeanor. She lived life in a way that most will never know. She loved hard, she played hard, and she fought harder. Reese swallowed a button battery in October of 2020 and lost her fight on December 17th of 2020 at just over 18 months old. Reese was an example for us all, and here's her story. Reese seemed sick and not her spunky self. We took her to the pediatrician, and she was diagnosed with croup, Croup is a common misdiagnosis for button battery ingestion, as it does mimic it almost to a T. After returning home, we noticed a button battery missing from a device in our home. We tore the house apart, and after a quick Google search, realized that we needed to get to the hospital immediately. Once there, they confirmed that the button battery had in fact been ingested, and there was emergency surgery to remove the battery. I think it's important to note here that even once the battery is taken out, these batteries continue to burn for days after. So whatever damage you think you have, it actually continues to get worse. After a few days in PICU, she was released on a liquid-only diet. A couple days later, took her back for a checkup, and they wanted to do a CAT scan. They were worried that a hole had been created. In fact, that battery had continued to burn. It burned a hole through her esophagus and then through her trachea, creating a fistula, which acts as a tunnel connecting the two. So we now had air going where it didn't need to go, and we had liquids going where it didn't need to go. That next morning, she went back for surgery. She came back with a G button so we could administer food to her stomach, and she came back sedated. That morning was the last morning that we saw Reese's herself. Plan was to keep her sedated and let her rest for a week, but it was just a few days later. She had her first code in the middle of the night. At that point in time, the doctors decided that we needed to go to Texas Children's Hospital. Reese spent most of her time at the hospital fighting sedation, showing us her spunky self, and I firmly believe that every doctor and nurse there knew her attitude and her spirit by the time we left, just from those sedation battles. A few weeks after Reese swallowed the battery, surgeons would attempt to close the holes in her esophagus and trachea. It was an all-day event, and it was successful. We were able to repair the holes. Now it was more of a waiting game. Let the healing happen, and then we were to take her off of the ventilator. We did get her off successfully that evening. I went down for dinner, came back up, and walked into the nightmare of starting compressions. This was now her second code event. They worked for about 10 minutes, and we were able to get her back that time, and the consensus was that she just wasn't strong enough yet. So we waited and tried again. Once we did try again, it was obvious that she was not going to be able to breathe on her own, and we're going to need a tracheotomy. Our path was getting harder, but she was still with us, and we could do this together. Around 8 o'clock that evening, they took her back for the trach. Came back in, got settled. Middle of the night, woke up to the doctors in the room filled. Numbers weren't looking right. They wanted to give her a different trait that would be a better fit. We did that. 8:30 in the morning, same thing. The doctors were back. Numbers weren't looking right. They wanted to do a bedside scope, at which point the real nightmare began for us. It was shortly after that the beeping started. I remember watching the numbers, the DStat, and the last one I saw was 6 before I dropped my head to pray. They worked for 30 to 40 minutes, and we could not get her back. Early on, while Reese was still fighting her battle, I knew that I wanted to spread awareness about the dangers of button batteries. And at the time, I imagined it would be with Riri by my side. I guess my plan was a B plan. In Reese's hospital room sat a plaque that said, "He has a plan and I have a purpose." We always knew that Reese would do big things in this world, and her earthly battle may be over, but her true battle, her true plan, and her true purpose has just begun. There were 4,000 button battery ingestions reported in 2020. However, it's estimated that only 11% of all cases are reported, meaning that number is closer to 36,000 children annually. And any one of these instances could prove to be deadly. The CPSC released data on injuries of a 93% growth in injuries. Once ingested, the button battery can cause severe tissue burns in as little as 2 hours. 61.8% of ingestions are coming from the product. Not from our dump drawer, not from our trash can, from the product. As the market trend grows, the more products use these batteries, the more we're going to see these numbers rise. In December of 2020 alone, we know of two toddlers that passed away from a button battery ingestion. It's been estimated that a child swallows a button battery every 3 hours, which means that by the time we get done here today, at least one child will have swallowed a battery. We never knew about the dangers of button battery ingestion, and I hear families all of the time that didn't know either. It's a club I never wanted to be in. And I wish I wasn't sitting here in front of you today because that means my baby girl would still be with me. Please don't let the death of my daughter Reese and her purpose be in vain. We all have children that we love and want to protect, whether it's our own children or children in our lives. Help protect all the children in the United States so that we never have to hear a story like Reese's again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Trista. You know, members, you saw, I let her go even longer than some of the other witnesses, but I think we really wanted to allow her to tell this painful story so that we can do all that we can to make sure that no other family has to experience this, no other child has to experience this. At this point, the chairman has recognized each witness for 5 minutes, and now we will move to member questions, and I'm going to begin with 5 minutes. My first question has to do with the pink tax, and we've heard two sides of the story. I wanted to ask Ms. Mena about how my understanding is that, and by the way, I've experienced the pink tax myself. It wasn't in a product, it was in services, and it was at my cleaner when I was charged more for having a blouse, just a plain blouse. I take my husband's things in and I take mine in, and I saw that I was being charged more for exactly the same service. But it seems to me that it is nothing more than discrimination when you say that a pink scooter and a red scooter, or whatever a boy color is, a blue scooter, is as much as twice more. And, we've heard that, yes, there is the option, you can get the blue, but my question is, are the women who are marketed something for women or for girls aware of the other options that could be cheaper?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. No, they're not aware. And this is a whole problem with the pink tax. We're putting the burden back on the consumer to ferret out and look at different products to determine which one is the most cost effective for them. That is completely unreasonable. And quite frankly, I think it is illegal. This is a huge problem. There's no rational basis for a scooter, the one that is painted red, to be half the price of one that is painted pink. Or our study also found out that bike helmets, the helmet that is marketed to boys was half the price as a helmet painted pink that is marketed to girls. I'm the mother of 4 kids. I see this, as a real issue for consumers. And by the way, as I mentioned in our study, we studied close to 800 consumer products. One's marketed for babies, for teenagers, for adults, and for seniors. And we saw it across the board, no matter what the product category was.
The other criticism was that, sometimes there really are these kinds of differences. And how do we make sure that we're really talking about the equivalency?
Sure, and that I think is a great question. Look, I worked as an attorney, as I mentioned in my testimony, for Colgate-Palmolive. I've been a consumer protection attorney for a long time, but I mentioned Colgate-Palmolive because it's a consumer products company. This is where I really first started focusing on this idea of the ingredients in various products. It is not correct what was said before in other testimony that these differences are reasonable. In other words, if you have a shampoo and it might have a slightly different fragrance based on whether it's marketed to a woman or a man, it is not the fragrances that should account for a different cost. The majority of cost in any consumer product derives from research and development. That is the #1 cost center. And research research and development has nothing to do with what type of fragrance you might put in a shampoo. Many
I'm gonna have to cut you off because I do want to get to one other question of one other witness. I wanted to talk to Ms. Krakow, about the horse slaughter bill. And how big a problem is this in the United States, that horses are being transported for human consumption out of the United States of America? And who are these, where are these horses?
Thank you, Chairwoman, and I'll try to be brief here, but from the ASPCA's perspective, one horse is too many. If any horses are being exported for this purpose, that represents cruelty, but we know that the number has been dropping pretty significantly in recent years. So between 2016 and last year, the number of horses being exported for slaughter dropped by 78%. So that's down to 23,000 horses last year. And if you compare that to the 2.3 million Americans that have said that they are both willing and able. When I say able, like I live in Washington, D.C., I can't necessarily adopt a horse, even though I would really want to. That's what we controlled for there. And they are both willing and able to do that. So we know that there are homes for these horses.
Thank you. So we're still talking about tens of thousands. Thank you to the witnesses. And now I recognize Mr. Bilirakis for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for holding this very important, very informative hearing. The first question is for Ms. Hamsmith. Thank you so much for joining us here today and for taking on this task while still grieving. What happened to your little girl, Reese, is a terrible tragedy. Can you elaborate, ma'am, on your testimony regarding your outreach to companies and what their rationale is as to why there aren't better standards in place?
Most of the companies that I've spoken to are fully supportive of what we're trying to get done here. We look at the toy law that was enacted that required screws to secure those in, and everybody's wondering, why have we not done this for everyday products? I think it's pretty well supported across the board that our children do have access to things that are not just specifically children toys. And in our case, it was a remote. You know, she reached up, grabbed that remote, dropped it, is what we're assuming, and that's how she got in. So the support has really been quite unwavering as far as the need for this for our children across the U.S.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to speak with a parent whose child was affected by this in Jacksonville. Congressman Rutherford introduced me to, and she told me the story, and I'm a co-sponsor of the bill. So as you develop this proposal, are there particular companies that you modeled it after to help prevent another tragedy like the one your family has endured?
So what we would like to do is delegate it to the CPSC for them to make the choice on how to properly secure these closures in the warning labels. Of course, the toy industry does have the screws. I know the CPSC had talked about push-pull mechanisms. They are currently looking into the most cost-effective way to do this. And of course, the best way to keep these secure and out of our children's hands.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Ms. Barnes, in addition to my role as the committee, the co-chair of the Congressional Travel and Tourism Caucus, as you know, one of the themes of our caucus is that we all benefit when tourism is thriving. It means less tax burdens, more jobs, and a strengthened economy. I know you agree with that. Most everyone does. Unfortunately, travel and tourism was one of the hardest hit sectors during the pandemic. Common sense solutions like a Travel and Tourism Act will help boost the economy and help get us moving in the right direction. While this committee has vast jurisdiction, it certainly isn't exclusive when it comes to your sector. What areas do you see we can focus on in our work with the Commerce Department, especially in terms of travel and tourism businesses most severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic?
So thank you for the question. And again, thank you for your leadership on the issues around travel and tourism. It's so important. I think one of the things that we see, and I think one of the things that we'd like to see included in the Travel and Tourism Act really is the establishment of an Assistant Secretary of Travel and Tourism. Because the ability for commerce to actually facilitate U.S. bids for large international events is really, really important. And additionally, one of the things that's really a deterrent for folks to come here to hold events here are slow visa processing. We're up at over 400 days in some cases for folks to get a visa to come to the U.S. Our wait times in customs and having inadequate infrastructure. And so an example of how an assistant secretary could really facilitate bids and help to alleviate some of these challenges would be to ensure that visa appointments and processing times are efficient for international attendees, ensure adequate CBP and TSA staffing are available at airports during the times around the event, and then obviously to identify federal infrastructure resources to build the infrastructure that's needed to host events. It's really important that we have that whole of government approach. As I mentioned in my testimony, we're the only one of the top G20 countries that doesn't have a tourism minister. And so without senior leadership at the Department of Commerce, again, directed by Congress, we won't be able to really optimize all that we could from an economic standpoint across this industry. So really think that is important for us to move forward and elevate and make the country more globally competitive related to travel specifically.
Okay, I know I have to stop, so I'll submit the rest of the questions for, but I do want to know this, as far as the backlog is concerned with regard to the visa processing, what was it like? Maybe you can answer this at another time. What was it like prior to the pandemic? Did we have a backlog?
Yeah.
And to what extent?
It was 12 days on average, and now we're up again, well over 230 days for the top 10 markets, I believe, and 400 to 600 days for some countries.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back, Madam Chair. Thanks for the extra time.
Thank you. And now I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chair Schakowsky. I wanted to ask Ms. Kraska about the SAFE Act. I know it's very important to protect horses from slaughter. But there could very well be inhumane treatment of horses on the way to slaughter. And that's what I wanted to issue about. Talk, if you could, a little bit about how horses are treated on their way to slaughter, and is there further abuse that occurs?
Much for the question, Chairman. And this is one of the worst parts of the slaughter pipeline. So what we consider the pipeline is everything between when horses end up in kill pens and all the way when after they make the 28+ hour journey all the way across the border to Canada or Mexico. And during this time, kill buyers are turning a profit by the number of horses or the poundage, I guess, that they're cramming into trailers at one time. So they're going to try to fit as many animals in there as they can. These are unfamiliar animals that don't know each other. And we know from when horse slaughterhouses were operating in the United States that many of these horses were showing up at slaughterhouses with absolutely horrific injuries, like eyeballs hanging from their heads and limbs that were completely off, dead in the trailer. I mean, once a horse goes down, it's very difficult for them to get back up in that type of situation. And we also know that there was a study published last year, 2021, in the journal Meat Science that found that carcass bruising on horses that American horses that were exported for slaughter to Mexico, I think it was about 79%. So that indicates that it's a really, really highly prevalent problem. The EU also did an audit in 2014 that found very similar things. So we know that slaughter is cruel from start to finish.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all that you do to protect animals. I wanted to also ask Ms. Hamsmith with regard to her daughter's tragedy. But before it, were you aware of how much damage the button battery could cause to Reese's system? I fear that too few know the serious and deadly risks, and also maybe how Reese's law would help implement regulations to warn parents about the dangers of these batteries.
No, we were not aware at all. When a battery is ingested, it actually causes that positive and negative charge to connect. So it's literally burning our children from the inside out. Obviously, we had zero clue that that could happen. As far as what this legislation could do, having the stronger warning labels that are actually at a point parents can see and are more graphic in detail is so important for parents to know what actually can happen and what those long term, I
Well,
guess,
thank,
yes. What can happen long term, and that this isn't always something that these kids come back from.
thank you so much. And then lastly, I wanted to ask Ms. Menon if you would elaborate on why the FTC needs the new authority in the Pink Tax Repeal Act, and can you address the concern that some have raised that ensuring women pay the same price as men might somehow mean less choice for consumers?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, the FTC needs this legal authority because they currently don't have it, and otherwise we're going to result in a patchwork of different state laws. We here in New York have a very good state law that bans the pink tax, but the majority of states do not. And so obviously this law would give FTC the necessary legal authority it needs to be able to crack down on the pink tax. To your second question about choice, this, in my opinion, does not in any way diminish consumer choice because look, at the end of the day, all this is doing is telling manufacturers that they cannot charge more for what is really the same exact product. And so we're in no way interfering with consumer choice. And I would add in the New York State, where we do have a very robust law, we have not seen any evidence of an impact on consumer choice at all.
Right, thank you so much, and I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And now I recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Rogers, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me join in saying happy birthday. We're both May babies. All right. Okay,
Happy
before
birthday to you then, too.
Thank you. Before I begin my questions, this morning we received a letter from the National Tribal Horse Coalition. And I'd like to, it includes some federally recognized Native nations in my home state expressing their opposition to HR 3355, the SAFE Act. I'll be looking into the issues that they raise and would ask for it to be entered into today's record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Ms. Manning, thank you again for testifying. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I have significant concerns with HR 3853, the so-called pink tax repeal legislation. The simple truth of the matter is that there's many different variables for how the price of a product or service is determined. And we're seeing this same debate unfold with alleged price gouging proposals, but time and time again, we learn that multiple factors go into determining prices. Like those recent proposals, this legislation is a solution in search of a problem. The legislation uses the term, quote, substantially similar, which is defined as having no substantial differences. In your research, would that take into consideration what the different variables could be when determining the price of a good or service?
So thank you for the question. And this language, substantially similar, is very important. In fact, it's the same language that's used in the New York state law that we just heard about. And it's one of the reasons why the New York state law hasn't been effective at equalizing the prices of goods that are targeted towards men and women, because in order for goods to be considered substantially similar, they have to have no substantial differences in the materials used in production, intended use of the good, the functional design and features of the good, the brand of the good. And substantially similar services are defined as two services that exhibit no substantial difference in the amount of time to provide the service, the difficulty in providing the service, the cost of providing the service. And of course, all of these are factors in the way that goods and services are priced. So a market price is simply the intersection of market supply and market demand, and there are different price points for every different type of product depending on the features.
Thank you. Ms. Manning, you state in your testimony, quote, "A disparity isn't always the evidence of discrimination." But because the legislation is vague in defining what factors should be considered when determining if something is discriminatory, the FTC could simply determine whether or not a price for that good or service is discriminatory without any justification. Wouldn't this allow the FTC to determine the prices that business may sell their products or services?
Yes, and if not the exact price, I don't know that the FTC is going to get in the business of saying this bottle of shampoo has to be $5.99. Because of the language of this bill, I could foresee the FTC becoming very prescriptive and formulaic in terms of how products that are made and marketed for the two different sexes are ultimately priced.
And I have one more question. To make matters worse, the legislation grants the FTC with the first time civil penalty authority for a violation of the act. So now the FTC gets to label any price they see as discriminatory when businesses themselves don't even know. Then they get to hit a company with civil penalties for which many will not be able to afford. And I don't see any kind of cost benefit analysis or economic impact conducted by the FTC Bureau of Economics. So it almost suggests that we're going to ignore the impact on business, but I'd also like to think about the consequences for consumers. How do you see our constituents being impacted when it's already difficult to find products on the shelves?
Sure. Well, it's important when lawmakers consider any new regulation to do a cost benefit analysis. And of course, the cost of a new regulation isn't simply a dollar figure. It is also the cost in this case of risk or legal exposure when firms like retailers or manufacturers produce or market products to the two different sexes. They'll now face the specter of litigation, the specter of being accused of discrimination when in fact there's not discrimination at play, but rather a disparity based on supply and demand factors. And this cost is going to be passed along to consumers during a time where I don't have to tell you, but we're experiencing record high inflation, 8.3% this April over 12 months. This is a very difficult time to navigate the marketplace as an American consumer, and I hope lawmakers don't make it more difficult.
Thank you. The title for today's hearing is about legislation strengthening our economy. I'm very concerned that this legislation, the so-called pink tax repeal, will actually have the opposite effect on small businesses. And to all my colleagues, we need to stay focused on celebrating the diversity of businesses, large and small, family-owned and operated, and the vast products and services these businesses offer. I also want to say thanks to Reese's mom for joining us. I've had the chance to meet you and talk with you, and I appreciate you sharing your story and bringing this legislation forward. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And now I recognize Kathy Castor, Congresswoman Castor, for 5 minutes for questioning.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and happy birthday to you. And thank you for organizing this important consumer protection hearing where we have such a wide variety of topics on animal cruelty and manufacturing and gender discrimination. And of course, thank you, Ms. Hamsmith, for sharing your personal story. You're very brave to do so. You're speaking up for a lot of parents who often don't have the wherewithal to appear before a congressional committee and tell this story, but it's a very important one. I represent the Sunshine State and watched with dismay during the pandemic how so many small business owners and mom and pop businesses really suffered when travel and tourism fell off. In 2020, the travel industry's economic footprint fell a whopping 42% from 2.6 trillion to 1.5 trillion, resulted in a loss of 5.6 million travel supported jobs, according to U.S. Travel, Ms. Barnes. So I was focused on helping and introduced with Representative Upton the Protecting Tourism in the United States Act to direct the Department of Commerce to take a deep dive on the effects of the pandemic on travel and tourism and help us with an action plan in growing back. So I think a few of these bills would really help. Ms. Barnes, you answered some of the questions I was going to ask already, but maybe talk a little bit more about what we what the impact was of the pandemic, how fast the fall off was, and the real challenges for those businesses as we work to get all of those small businesses, the businesses large and small, and all of the industry back on its feet.
No, thank you for your question, and thank you so much for everything you've done to lead our recovery efforts. As you note, it really was incredibly catastrophic. Prior to the pandemic, the U.S. travel industry employed 1 in 10 jobs and was the #2 export for our country. And we still have a long way to go. We have really recovered strong on domestic leisure, but international travel is still down at the end of 2021, about 78%. Business travel down 56%. And we really need consistent policies to help ensure that we can continue to recover. We're still looking at a 2024-2025 time horizon just to get back to 2019 numbers, and that would be absent 5 years of growth. One of the things we really need to see on the international side is for the administration to lift the pre-departure testing requirement that's currently still in place, requiring 24 hours before you come back to the U.S. Or come to the U.S. to have a test. And, Mexico, Canada, the UK, most of the EU, all of Latin America aren't requiring this. So it's really putting us at a competitive disadvantage. We also need to see an accelerated processing of visas. I noted the visa backlog. It is tremendous. We really need to move that forward more quickly. And then, we also think that there is an opportunity to encourage businesses to get back out there, to get back to work, to get back to traveling. We need business leaders to really lead by example. And then we also have a challenge with our workforce. Our workforce is really significantly suffering. 1.7 million jobs are open in the travel and tourism industry. And so we need to look at things like the H-2B visa process, which I know is out of your jurisdiction, but we need access to more workers. For every 100 jobs that are open across the entire economy, only 65 people are unemployed. Unemployed Americans are looking for work. So that's something that we also need. Without workforce, we won't be able to bring back the travel industry.
Well, thank you very much. And for my colleagues, supporting the travel and tourism industry is so important to building back our economy and American jobs. So I'll look forward to working with everyone to craft the right policies moving forward. I want to move on. Councilmember Menon, on HR 4081, the Informing Consumers About Smart Devices Act, I know everyone knows that smart device usage has increased astronomically across the country. That's how we operate in this world now. So that means it's never been more important to ensure that consumers are fully informed about their smart devices, from what data these devices collect, to what capabilities these devices possess, and what they're used for. So you've got a broad range of experience, but I'm especially worried about our kids and teens they'll never know a world where smart devices don't exist, and they are particularly vulnerable to what they encounter in the digital realm. So talk to us about what you learned in your experience and what we need to be focused on when it comes to kids and the Internet of Things.
Thank you very much. I was invited to offer testimony on the pink tax, so that's where I'm going to keep my comments on. The subject that you're raising is incredibly important, but I want to respect the fact that the invitation from the committee came on the pink tax, so I'll keep my comments to that. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think a lot of my colleagues here understand the challenges and how important it is for us to move on kids' privacy. I want to thank the chair and all the other members who are working on children's online privacy, including my kids.
We're going to have to
Privacy
move on.
Act.
Your time is way up, so.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that, and I yield back then.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'm calling on Congressman Guth. 5 minutes are yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and also happy birthday. Hope you have a great birthday there. I guess you're in Evanston, so have a great birthday in a great city.
Happy to be
So
with all of
thanks.
you.
Thank you. I want to thank you for having this hearing and Ranking Member Bill Arakis for holding this hearing and for all the witness in your testimony and especially Ms. Hamsmith that's willing to share your stories, which hopefully will lead to legislation to, as you said, to continue the life of and the legacy of your child. But today I want to talk about horses. And as you know, I'm from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and we're home with the greatest 2 minutes in sports, with this year proved to be great with Rich Strike winning from coming from so far behind. While we're well known for our wonderful thoroughbreds, we also have a variety of other horses and other competitions, which, you know, today we're talking about the Tennessee walking horse. And I just want to share that I've heard from stakeholders from the Tennessee walking horse industry in my state and also in other states, and their concerns about the PASS Act. Concerns raised to my office indicate that the Tennessee walking horse is already one of the most inspected horses under current law by both the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service and the Horse Industry Organization inspectors. To that end, the PASS Act eliminates the industry inspection entities under the Horse Protection Act and replaces them with new employees of the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Justice. USDA has never had the policing powers over this issue, and therefore there are concerns that it does not have the expertise nor the resources to oversee that important responsibility. And to share some of their concerns in greater depth, I would just like to submit for the record the following documents: a written statement from the Performance Show Horse Association and several other written statements from industry groups, inspection reports from the past few years, and a study by the National Academy of Sciences regarding Tennessee walking horse inspection. And my understanding, Madam Chair, is that the committee already has these documents and it's been presented before the hearing. So I'd like to submit those for the record. And just to close, I want all horses to be protected, and I want them to all be safe from abuse. I strongly believe if horses are if they are continuing to be sored in violation of the Horse Protection Act, we need to address that. Perhaps should we look to the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act as a model? In that case, our committee affirmed that thoroughbred racing could and should be independently regulated. I believe that stakeholders can find consensus that will preserve the Tennessee walking horse in their competitions, and most important of all, protect these wonderful horses. And I hope this information is useful to the committee as it moves through the legislative process. I don't really have any questions, Madam Chair, and I'll yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and I now recognize Congresswoman Clark for her 5 minutes of questions.
Happy birthday, Madam Chair. Before I begin my prepared remarks and questions, I'd like to once again publicly express my heartfelt condolences to the loved ones of the victims of the onslaught of gun violence in our nation. I remain distraught and dismayed at the tolerance and indifference of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle at the now decades-old endemic gun violence that continues to plague our nation. I'd like to encourage my colleagues to search their souls and join the 90% of Americans who desire to see us pass common sense anti-gun violence laws in this Congress to break the cycle of death that your inaction actually permits. In other words, in the words of Senator Murphy, what are we doing? Having said that, Madam Chair, I now want to direct my questions to our distinguished panelists and thank them for joining us today. My questions begin with this statement. Excuse me, sorry about that. Let me thank our witnesses for their testimony today. To put it simply, discrimination against women in our civil society is broad and pervasive, and is particularly pronounced against women of color. Studies have shown that doctors pay less attention to women who complain about the severity of their symptoms. Women continue to make 83 cents to every dollar earned by men, and women are less likely than men to be promoted into leadership roles despite having equal or greater experiences. Not surprisingly, this very same discrimination is also baked into the price of goods and services that we as women pay for daily. Studies have shown that women are frequently charged more than men for goods and services that require the same amount of labor, use the same components, and serve the same purposes. This is marketplace discrimination, plain and simple, and it is abhorrent and cannot be allowed to continue. And that's why I'm a proud co-sponsor of Congresswoman Jackie Spire's Pink Tax Repeal Act. Having said that, my first question is for my dear friend and colleague, Councilmember Menon. It's so nice to see you here today. When you oversaw the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs, your agency led a groundbreaking study that exposed gender-based pricing across 35 different categories and nearly 800 products. Unfortunately, there are those who still claim that the pink text is a myth. Is that what the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs study found? And how do you respond to those claims?
Well, thank you so much, Congressmember. It's great to see you as always. First of all, the study that we did, which studied over 800 consumer products, found incredible price discrimination. You can't argue that when women are being overcharged 42% of the time, that is in any way not intentional. And it really cut across every single product category, everything from products targeted to seniors like bladder pads, to the scooter example, the helmets I mentioned, shampoos, razors, every single category across the board. It is very clear from this seminal study that we did that women are truly being charged a pink tax. And it's abhorrent. And if you take that over the course of their lifetime, they are literally paying tens and tens of thousands of dollars in money that they shouldn't have to.
Can you speak a little more about the impact this discriminatory practicing can have on women over the course of their lives?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, a study by the state of California estimated that the pink tax on services alone cost a woman roughly $1,350 per year. So, if you adjust that for inflation, it means that a woman is paying a pink tax at least the equivalent of $2,300 each year. And picture if that same amount of money was instead being deposited in a retirement account with 5% annual returns. We're talking about over the course of a lifetime, women are being charged hundreds of thousands of dollars that they shouldn't be.
And why is it so important that we legally hold companies accountable for gender-based pricing discrimination?
Because unfortunately, if we do not hold them legally accountable, they will oftentimes not do the right thing. You can walk into any drugstore, any store across the United States, and you can see evidence of this. You'll see shampoos where literally the shape of the bottle might be curvy and it is marketed to women, or it might be painted pink, or it might have a slightly different fragrance. So we're seeing this is endemic to product categories across the board. And so it is imperative that Congress regulate and specifically give the Federal Trade Commission the legal jurisdiction to crack down on these illegal discriminatory practices.
I thank you, Councilwoman, for your diligence, your hard work, and your commitment, not only to our city, but of course to our nation. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back and just ask my colleagues, what are we doing? And I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you. And now I recognize Representative Bouchon not for 15, how about for 5 minutes for your questions?
Thank you very much,
you, Madam
Madam
Chair.
Chair. Let me add my well wishes for your birthday to everybody else's as well. I think it's a great opportunity to discuss the legislation before the committee today. Included among the bills is one that I introduced with my Florida colleagues, Representative Soto and Salazar, to support the United States tourism industry. That's H.R. 7820, the Travel and Tourism Act.
Excuse me, I'm gonna let you continue if it's okay with Mr. Bouchon, because I actually called on Mr. Bouchon, who was next in line for
Oh, I'm sorry.
questioning. Mr. Bouchon, do you want to just go ahead?
No, he should just go ahead and I'll go
Okay.
after him.
Sorry about
Okay.
that, Larry. I heard
No, you're fine.
I only heard the
No,
last
these-
syllable of your name.
all
So
good.
visitors from across the world travel to the United States to take advantage of all the great things there are to do and see in our nation. And in the 2nd District of Florida, and indeed across our entire state, tourists enjoy white sand beaches, state and national parks with diverse wildlife, first-class fishing, and water sports, and some of the world's great golf courses. The state of Florida saw a record number of visitors for the 10th consecutive year just before the pandemic. In fact, in 2019, contributed $97 billion to Florida's economy, supporting over 1.6 million jobs. Unfortunately, in 2020, we all know what happened. The pandemic grounded the United States tourism industry to a complete stop. And the many families who rely on this industry sustained substantial losses and were often forced to close the doors of their businesses their livelihoods depended on. Fortunately, the response by the Florida governor and legislature was inspiring across multiple industries, and they were ready to respond at the height of the pandemic. Because of their leadership, Florida exceeded visitor projections for every quarter in 2021, and so far this year, setting records. According to data from the U.S. Travel Association, Florida's recovery to travel has outpaced other states' recoveries in every month since February of 2021. The United States and the federal government should learn from the governors of these states that were so successful and the industry leaders in those states as well. I have a question for Ms. Tori Barnes. When the CDC puts out confusing or conflicting guidance, as they did throughout the pandemic, how does this affect your industry, the decisions that they make in their planning?
Thank you for the question. And no, absolutely. We've absolutely seen a very uneven recovery. But I think from what you laid out, one of the most important takeaways is that we can have health and safety measures in place. And we can return to business practices that enable folks to move about. And that is absolutely critical. I think Florida was, in fact, a really good example of letting businesses continue to thrive. And so what we really need from the government is clear, consistent policies across the board and not a patchwork approach. The reason that we are seeing such an uneven recovery is because we've got a different environment in different states. And in the international front in particular, as I noted, we still have this pre-departure testing requirement, which is not based on science at this juncture, but simply CDC keeping a strong hold on that particular provision. So we couldn't agree more that the policies that Florida have taken have enabled health and safety as well as economic recovery, and that's critical to what we need for the whole of the travel and tourism industry.
So do you think then that input from industry leaders, people, your members, to the federal agencies, Department of Commerce, CDC, other agencies, when they publish guidelines, shouldn't they be consulting with you so that they can understand, they have a much more clear interpretation, and we all get the consistent messaging? Wouldn't that help?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And quite frankly, early on in the pandemic, we as an industry put together a health and safety guidance on our own to ensure that we had an even higher degree of health and safety than we already had within the industry. And we couldn't agree more that we need to have consistent messaging. There needs to be collaboration. And I think that's why this legislation is so important. We need to make sure that there is someone that is prioritizing the travel industry within the government. Again, that's why we would like to see.
Well, I thank you very much for your answer. Our time is growing short, but for the record, I agree that informed input by specialized knowledge is usually a better thing. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
You're muted.
We can't hear you, Madam Chair. I'm going to have to call on a Democrat right now, Debbie Dingell, who's been waiting, is next for 5 minutes of questions, and then I'll be calling on you. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and happy birthday, like everyone else. I hope you enjoyed spending it with your colleagues and doing good work.
My favorite people. Thank you.
And I want to thank you for holding this hearing, and I'm heartened by the amount of attention that all of these diverse bipartisan proposals are receiving. And want to thank all of you who are testifying here today, to help for what the work you're doing to help us discuss how we can do more to protect consumers and strengthen our economy. I would love to talk about all the subjects, but I probably will only be able to get to two if I'm lucky. So I'm manufacturing girl. So I'm going to start with manufacturing. I've long fought for policies to support domestic manufacturing capacity, strengthen supply chains, grow American jobs, and improve America's competitiveness. The impact of COVID-19 underscored the vulnerabilities in our manufacturing base, and we must be proactive in taking steps to promote further workforce training, research and development, and supply chain resiliency in critical industries. Mr. Hagopian, how would having a centralized location for federal manufacturing programs help alleviate supply chain disruption?
Thank you. It definitely would be helpful if we had some central repository for information specifically related to programs that would help benefit our industry. Right now, as I stated in my opening comments, it's very difficult for us to find what we're looking for because we just have to comb through all the data. So I did look through the manufacturing.gov website. Let's just say it's a good start, but it needs a lot of work. And so to that extent, so long as the information that is provided is done so alongside industry and industry partners like the National Tooling and Machining Association, I think it would be most effective for small and medium and large businesses, frankly, as well.
Thank you for that. And while we're talking about manufacturing capabilities, I just want to reinforce that we need to get chips into the American compete supply chain subtitle across the finish line to strengthen our domestic manufacturing capacity now. Let me switch gears to another critical issue. I've been hearing with great deal of respect my colleague, the ranking member of the committee, but I really do have some real concerns about gender equity. In many cases, women are paying more than men. That is a reality for the very same identical personal care items, while still, unfortunately, in this country, on average, earning less for every dollar than a man earns, exasperating purchase power inequities and outcomes. I am an original co-sponsor of the Pink Tax Repeal Act, and I heard the issues she raised, and hopefully we can talk about them. But I think it's beyond time that we end gender discrimination in the pricing of goods and services. So I think this measure is vital to protecting women in this country. Ms. Manana, it's an honor to be here with you. Is there any current, well, let me go to this. Why is both the FTC and state attorney general enforcement authority necessary to prevent unfair discrimination in the pricing of these nearly identical products?
Thank you. You really need both to have jurisdiction. The Federal Trade Commission obviously is going to be setting national standards. They'll do a lot through rulemaking. It will be incredibly important to have that national standard, and they are able to crack down on national retailers that may be operating in numerous states across the country. At the same time, we also, of course, want to have the state attorney generals to have their jurisdiction to be able to go after these practices as well.
I think there's oftentimes a misconception in this conversation that women should just purchase lower price men's products without addressing the fundamental issue of why the prices between substantially identical products are different in the first place. Ms. Manning, how does this argument perpetuate harmful disparities in purchasing power and equity for women? Would leaving this issue unaddressed exacerbate disparities in equity for women, especially for those in lower incomes who might feel additionally constrained by increased prices?
Absolutely. The evidence is unbelievably clear that women are being charged more than men for literally almost the same product. I'd like to give a couple additional examples. Neutrogena women's lotion that's being sold $16. The men's Neutrogena lotion $10.28. Walgreens Schick razors $18.50 for women. Walgreens Schick razors $15 for men. I could go on and on and on. Our study showed again 42% of the time that women were being charged more. And if you take that over the course of a woman's lifetime, it's completely unfair, this pink tax. This is money that is being charged to women. It is not being charged to men. And when you compound that with the fact that women on average are making 83 cents to the dollar to men, we are losing out on incredible amounts of resources that are rightfully belong to women in this country.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm out of time, but I do want to associate with the comments of several of my other committee members on the subjects of the need to do something about gun violence in this country as well. I yield back.
Now, I want to make it clear, I'm calling on Congressman Bouchon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy birthday.
Thanks.
Thanks for having the hearing. Travel and tourism are an important economic sector for Indiana and the United States that have taken a massive hit over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. The number of overseas arrivals for March were still 52% below pre-pandemic levels, and overall travel spending was still 5% below 2019 levels. This is why I'm glad that the Visit America Act, H.R. 6965, and the Travel and Tourism Act, H.R. 7820, are before us today. These bills will build off the work that Congress has already taken this year in enacting the bipartisan Restoring Brand USA Act, which I was proud to be a co-sponsor of. That will help promote the return of international visitors to the U.S. by ensuring that Brand USA has access to the funding it needs to fulfill its mission and to help showcase the world the great things to visit in Indiana and throughout our country. Unfortunately, successes like this are counteracted by the continuing implementation of COVID-19 travel restrictions and testing requirements, such as requiring all international visitors to show a negative test within 24 hours of arrival. I have co-signed a bipartisan letter highlighting that the inbound testing order remains the single biggest barrier to the full recovery of our international travel system, and that fully vaccinated travelers, in my view, should be exempt from these requirements. And ultimately, people who can show that they are naturally immune due to previously acquired COVID-19 disease should also be exempted. Unfortunately, the CDC has not enacted common sense policies like that. So when someone is considering visiting the US or Europe, we help make that choice for them by making travel harder. Ms. Barnes, thank you for all that you and the U.S. Travel Association do to support our economy. Would you agree that inbound testing requirements remain one of, if not the primary deterrent for many travelers coming to our country? Is that true?
Congressman, thank you for that question. In fact, we just did a recent international survey, and vaccinated travelers to come to top inbound markets, and 54% of them said that pre-departure testing requirements were still discouraging them from coming to the United States. And so absolutely, it's a deterrent. That and the visa processing backlog are two of the biggest issues. But the pre-departure testing requirement, that should go away today. Quite frankly, there's no science-based reason to keep that in place, and it is obviously a significant deterrent.
Well, thank you. I would agree with that. And as a physician, I have my own views on when and we should be testing completely asymptomatic vaccinated individuals, and what the result of a quote unquote positive test even means in those individuals. It's a deterrent in a lot of areas right now. And at some point, I really believe, we're going to have to decide when the end point is of just constantly testing everyone for COVID-19, because we'll be doing this forever if we don't define some endpoints here. Also, the Travel and Tourism Act before would require the development of a strategy to encourage international visitors to the U.S. I believe that this strategy should include provisions to encourage travel to places like Indiana that international visitors may not be aware of, like they would things that are in New York or Los Angeles, for example. What are some of the ways that you and the U.S. Travel Association would work with the administration to ensure Middle America doesn't get left out of these travel strategies that encourage people to visit our country?
Sure. So two things. One would be, we really do think it's important to have an assistant secretary for travel and tourism. The reason is we need to have someone that is really focused on the industry writ large and can help across all the agencies to really enable a more travel-friendly environment. And I think that it's important to note that Brand USA, in fact, and as you noted, you co-sponsored, and we're grateful for that, does this important work to bring international travelers to all destinations across all 50 states and communities alike. So having a senior level governmental official, again, I mentioned before that of the G20, the United States is the only country that does not have a minister of tourism. And so we think that having that person in place would be really important. Coupling that with the work that Brand USA does could mean really great things for all 435 districts in this country, including Indiana.
Well, thank you very much for that answer. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. And now I recognize Congresswoman Robin Kelly for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to lend my happy birthday to you also. Hope you have great plans this evening. I was saying thank you to Trista for providing her testimony today. I know it can't be easy to keep telling your story over and over, but it is inspiring to see you tragedy into action so no family has to go through what yours did. That was my hope, and children from accessing button and coin batteries so no family has to go through what the Ham-Smith family has had to go through. Just really wanted to give you, Tristan, the opportunity to share with the committee anything that you get to share in opening statement.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Kelly. I think it's important to note that in our case, Reese didn't make it, but there are many children across the U.S. that was not the case, and they did make it, but they're living with lifelong injuries. And when I say lifelong injuries, I'm talking they're having to go in for monthly dilations of their esophagus. Their voice boxes are paralyzed. They are living years of their life on a trach. For Reese, had she made it, they said that she would have been in the 3rd grade before being able to sit down and eat a meal with her fellow classmates for lunch. So I think it's important to note that, whether these kids live or die, the devastation, whether it's for the family or the child, is a lifelong devastation that needs to be fixed.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I am just law is being discussed today, and I just want to encourage my colleagues to join as co-sponsors and support this very, very important legislation so that, again, families will not have to go through the tragedy that this family went through. And with that, it's my birthday present to you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you both for that and for your support of this legislation. And now I want to give Debbie Lesko, who is one of the most loyal members of this subcommittee. And I appreciate your attendance and participation, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I wish you a blessed day and a blessed year.
Thank you.
I think we're discussing a lot of really good bills today. The Reese's Law, informing consumers about smart devices, Travel and Tourism Act, the Remote Notarization Act, the Manufacturing.gov Act, and the Visit America Act all are good bills, and I'm glad that they have bipartisan support. I have a question, though, about the bill that is called the pink tax bill. And I want to pursue that a little bit more. While others were talking, I went on to Amazon, and there were 20,000 results for moisturizers.
when I looked up moisturizers. And so it ranged from Bulldog Skincare Original Moisturizer, which is for men or teenage boys, $2.81 a fluid ounce. Neutrogena was $2.41 a fluid ounce. Aveeno was 61 cents a fluid ounce. And then I looked up deodorants on Amazon. There was 4,000 results for deodorants. I
Hi, this is
remember
Eric.
when my son was a teenager, he liked the Axe brand, right? Because that was advertised to teenage boys. An Axe black deodorant for men is $1.92 an ounce, versus, let's say, Lady Speed Stick is 81 cents an ounce. And there are 3,000 results for razors. The Gillette Venus Sensitive Disposable Razor, which is for women, is $2.32 a razor. The Gillette Sensor 3 Sensitive Men's Disposable Razor was $1.42 a razor. So obviously in that case, the same brand, they both say sensitive, they both say disposable. The woman's razor was more than the men's, but it's different. It's a different head to the razor, a different shape. So I guess my question is for Ms. Manning. How in the world is a woman or a man working for the Federal Trade Commission or in a state attorney general's office going to determine out of 20,000 different moisturizers or 4,000 different razors if the reason for the price difference was because it's marketed to a man versus a woman, or was it because of advertising? For instance, my son, when he was a teenager, he wanted the Axe brand, even though there are comparable brands that were a lot cheaper. Also, not necessarily with women and men, but also the point of it is how about cornflakes? I buy Kroger brand cornflakes. They're $1.49 a box. Kellogg's cornflakes, the same thing, are $5 a box. How is somebody in a government going to determine this?
Well, I so appreciate the question because I think your question raises the important point that these are highly competitive markets for consumer goods and that we are blessed with robust choice. And even now with retailers like Amazon, we have access to many more choices than before. And one misconception that I want to push back on is the idea that all of this choice is somehow a burden. This choice is not a burden. It's a great opportunity for women and men as consumers to find the exact product that they're looking for that fits their needs and their preferences and their price point. I also want to point out, since we're here with the Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee, that the best consumer protection is that market competition that we're talking about. And when there are retailers in the market who are trying to provide a good or service, whether it's for men or women or a gender neutral product, the downward pressure on price that we experience as consumers is because of market competition. And so I'm happy to hear that there are so many retailers offering so many different, a wide variety of choices in the marketplace. I also did some research while others were talking, and I found that the red and pink scooters that featured prominently in the New York City report are available on Walmart.com today for exactly the same price. They were cited as a Target.com purchase in the report. Because we have market competition, because there are different retailers, women and men as consumers can patronize businesses that price products according to their values and their needs.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I've run out of time, so I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back, and now I recognize Congressman Soto for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for your indulgence. It's graduation season, so it's been pretty busy back here in Florida's 9th. What an exciting day today. I'm thrilled to address multiple different key bills today with you and appreciate you and Ranking Member Bilirakis for your leadership to promote commerce and to protect consumers and ensure fair practices. whether it's manufacturing.gov, a centralized website to create a primary hub for information for federal manufacturing programs. We make microchips, we make aerospace products, we also make boat products in the district. So this is going to be key for our district. In addition, improving disclosures for devices like Alexa, Siri, and other home devices. We need to make sure we're protecting consumers. Stopping the pink tax, practice of charging women and girls more than men for similar products. We're right with you, Madam Chair, on this one. And Reese's Law, to protect children who accidentally ingest batteries, named after a young boy who tragically lost his life in one of these situations. Banning horse meat, horse soaring tactics, as well as online notarization and statewide notary standards. As a notary, I could appreciate that, and I certainly appreciate all that you're doing. I'm also honored to represent the theme park capital of the world, Orlando, Florida. Visitors come from around the United States and the world to enjoy major tourism destinations like Disney, Universal, SeaWorld, Legoland, Old Town, Gatorland, and so much more. Domestic tourism, I'm proud to report, Madam Chairwoman, has been very strong. The parks are packed as Americans are getting back to enjoying traveling with their families. I hope you see the same thing in all of your districts. International travel has increased in North America and in Europe, but it has been more difficult for folks in South America, Asia, and Australia, potentially because of pandemic-related delays. And so we want to make sure we're organized, have a plan to boost international tourism. And that's going to be exactly what the Travel and Tourism Act does. It's going to require the Secretary of Commerce to establish an annual goal, and for international visitors, it'll allow the Secretary to develop and implement a COVID-19 pandemic recovery and strategy to assist this recovery, as well as statutory authority for U.S. Travel and Tourism Advisory Board to make sure the Secretary is engaging with industry as we're developing and implementing COVID-19 pandemic recovery strategies. Madam Chair, I want to make clear that I support both H.R. 7820, the Travel and Tourism Act, as introduced by Mr. Dunn and myself from Florida, as well as H.R. 6965, the Visit America Act, as introduced by Ms. Titus of Nevada. As a sponsor of the Travel and Tourism Act, I want to make clear our intent is to have the bill be complementary of the Visit America Act and not a substitute for it. Is that also your understanding, and would you support moving the bills through committee through an open amendment process? And I asked Madam Chair if you wouldn't mind yielding for that question.
Sorry, what was the question? Excuse me, I'm sorry.
I'm asking, is it your understanding, and would you support moving the bills through the committee through an open amendment process to ensure the proposals are complementary to each other? And I ask if the chairwoman would like to yield to that question.
This is not a question that the chair can answer. If you want to yield to the chair of the committee, the chair of
Yes.
the full committee, yes.
I'm happy to yield to the Chair Pallone.
I don't know that he's still here.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. This was my understanding. It's something that I'll look forward to working with you and the ranking member and others on, so we get a bipartisan product that we all can support going forward. And thank you for your time, and a yield back.
Well, thank you. And I know that there's certainly a lot of bipartisan support for this legislation. So we'll work together to move it forward. And now I call on Representative Armstrong for his 5 minutes.
Happy birthday, Madam Chair. Before I start, I'd like to seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the American Land Title Association and 17 other organizations in support of HR 3962. And I think your staff has got that letter this morning.
Without objection. Without objection, so ordered.
All right. HR 3962, the Secure Act, is legislation to permit the nationwide use of remote online notarization which is simply an electronic notarization where the party and the notary are in different locations. Even before the pandemic, we were rapidly transitioning to a world where the business is conducted through remote and electronic transactions. You can bank via remote electronic transaction, testify in a
Hey,
judicial
sometime I
proceeding.
think I had to text real quick, and I want that's why it happened because
So,
And you can even draft estate documents that will eventually need to be notarized. There simply is no reason we should not allow remote online notarization. Mr. O'Neill, is remote online notarization the equivalent or even superior to in-person notarization?
Thank you, Representative Armstrong. Thank you again for your strong bipartisan leadership on this bill. I think comparing remote online notarization with traditional notarization is really instructive. Obviously, remote notarization is more convenient, but actually it's also safer and more reliable too. You can see that in several ways. One is the ID verification process. In a remote online notarization, you use the latest technological tools with multi-factor authentication, which is far superior to a notary trying to detect whether an ID that's handed to the notary is fraudulent or not. Second is that remote notarization results in a much more robust audit trail, an audio video recording. Traditional notarizations oftentimes don't have any evidence. Only a few states even require a notary to keep a paper journal. Finally, the outcome of the notarization. A traditional notarization results in a paper document with notarization typically at the end, and it's relatively easy to slip page or modify the document. Remote notarization, by contrast, results in a tamper-sealed electronic document. You see exactly what the document was when it was notarized and any changes made afterwards. And finally, I'll of course just add that both consumer and notary health and safety concerns make the remote option attractive and bring stronger consumer protections.
Yeah, as someone who's tried cases for a living, I agree that video evidence is highly probative and save considerable judicial resources. I've been a notary for two different professions, and I always wanted to get the one where you could actually pinch the paper and have the raised seal, but alas, I only ever had the stamp. So I don't know if there's a special level of notary you get to where you get that, or if they just were transitioning in the state of North Dakota. But what groups of people are most likely to benefit from expanded access remote online notarization services?
Well, obviously, all American consumers can benefit from remote services, but of course, think of the sick or elderly, people who are child caregivers, any immobilized Americans, or of course, anyone exercising social distancing can obviously benefit from remote notarization. I'll also highlight any Americans who are traveling overseas, including service members. If you're overseas, you often have to travel long distances to find an embassy or consulate to get a document notarized. Remote notarization allows you to connect with a US notary in real time, and the resulting document is an electronic document that can be used instantly in the United States, as opposed to trying to find a way to get a paper document notarized overseas, shipped back home for use. So I think it benefits all Americans.
I actually remember when we had a lot of National Guardsmen and women deployed to Iraq. We had people in North Dakota that would specifically go over there essentially as couriers to get documents notarized from overseas Guardsmen and women. And it was fascinating that even at that point in time that we couldn't figure out a better way to do it. But this bill doesn't seek to federalize the regulation of notaries or otherwise replace authority of states to regulate notaries, right?
That's correct. This bill does not replace the states as the primary authority for both commissioning and regulating notaries. It simply provides a legal foundation and minimum consumer protections that states can exceed. And in fact, every state should be encouraged to add additional consumer protections and regulate notaries as they traditionally have done.
And there's nothing in this bill that mandates a specific use of any particular technology either, is there?
That's an extremely important point. This bill is technology neutral, doesn't mandate the use of any specific technologies, so that notaries can continually take advantage of whatever latest technologies, fraud deterring technologies come along.
Oh, and I'll just end with, I've actually had a lot of fun working with Representative Dean on this issue. We've got to do some different things, and it's not a trivial thing. The pandemic showed us that people, and particularly with housing markets and highly competitive things, that this is really something that is more than just advancing technology. This can help people in a very real way while still protecting everything that notaries do. So I appreciate the chance to do this. Thank you for your testimony. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. And now I call on Kathleen Rice. I know you've been patiently waiting, and I appreciate it, for your 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And again, happy birthday to you. What a way to spend your birthday. But I'm happy to be here with you. First, I want to say a couple of things. There are very few bright parts. There's really very little that you could say positively about the pandemic. But one thing I appreciated during the pandemic was that I wasn't wearing clothes that had to be dry cleaned anymore, because I am sick and tired of paying not just $1 more to have the same article of clothing cleaned, but multiple dollars more for no reason that I've heard during this hearing. It was said that disparity isn't always evidence of discrimination, but in the absence of the disparity being based on something else, it's flat out discrimination, it seems to me. And instead of talking about the possible negative economic impact of repealing the pink tax, how about the negative economic impact that women are experiencing every single day by spending more for the same exact thing and taking that money out of something that can be put in the bank, making money for them, given their lesser status already in the workplace? So I just wanted to make those two comments. I have to say that I've known Julie Manning for many years, and I'm so thrilled to have you here. You've been such a fighter for consumers, and thank you so much for your time today. I want to ask you specifically about I'd like to talk a little bit about the New York State pink tax law that was passed in 2020. It was obviously legislation aimed at ending gender-based price discrimination, and it was based on the powerful study that you did. Can you explain to us how the law is being implemented in New York? Has it, because it was claimed that the New York law has not had a positive impact on lowering prices for women. Can you talk a little bit about how it's being implemented in New York, and has it been effective in curtailing discriminatory gender pricing?
Yes, absolutely. Great to see you, Congressmember Rice, as always. So the New York State law was based on the study that we did at the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. And the New York State law covers both goods and services that are essentially similar. It defines goods as substantially similar goods as two goods that exhibit little difference in the materials used in production, intended use, or design. And services definition is services exhibit little difference in the amount of time, delivering, difficulty, and cost in providing the service. It has been implemented, and fines are $250 for the first violation. We think this law is incredibly important because it covers both goods and services. And as you correctly pointed out, women are being overcharged thousands and thousands of dollars a year for no reason whatsoever. And when, for example, our study of 800 goods showed that 42% of the time women are being charged more than men, the only natural conclusion there is that there is discriminatory intentional conduct.
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the example that you gave about the scooter, that is the same product, literally the same product. And the only difference is the color. I mean, that to me is just the most outrageous example of this.
Correct.
Can
And
you
Target apologized and changed it as a result of the study. So the comment that was made earlier about that other companies aren't, we really were able to get companies across the board to stop this discriminatory practice.
So Target did that, Ms. Menon, and did it have the impact of not having any scooters available for girls?
Absolutely not. Scooters are available for girls. Scooters are available for boys. The only difference now is that they're the same price as they should be.
I've got about 50 seconds, and we talked before about the structure of the FTC working in conjunction with state attorneys general. Can you talk about the enforcement structure in New York and how that works?
Absolutely. So the state is the enforcer. The city doesn't have the legal jurisdiction to enforce on the pink tax, so the state is doing it. It's the state consumer affairs department. They're the ones that are enforcing it. The state attorney general also has enforcement. This is why, again, it's so important to have the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission, I practiced law before them for years. They have particular expertise in ferreting out this exact type of content.
I want to thank all the witnesses here. This is incredibly important conversation on all of these bills, and I yield back the 7 seconds I have left, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you so much. And I am really, I would almost say honored to have someone who has signed on to be at this hearing today, has waited for quite a while, and I'm proud to say that Paul Tonko, Congressman Tonko, now has his 5 minutes. And this is, if I'm not wrong, last but not least.
There you go. Well, thank you, Chair Schakowsky, and thank you to you and Chair Pallone for holding this hearing on these really important legislative issues. And of course, a ringing happy birthday. And thank you for your youthful activism, which cannot be denied. I'd like to start by highlighting the Manufacturing.gov Act, which I introduced with Representatives Upton and Axie last year. Small and medium-sized enterprises are the bedrock of our manufacturing base, employing about 43% of all manufacturing workers in the U.S. They play an instrumental role in producing critical products essential to our economic vitality. They include fabricated metal products, machinery, electrical equipment, appliances, computers, plastics, to name a few. I think we all agree the federal government needs to be doing more to promote manufacturing here at home. But Mr. Hagopian, what are some of the current federal programs that assist small and medium-sized manufacturers to become more competitive? And how familiar are manufacturers with these programs?
Thank you for the question. I would say that manufacturers, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, are largely unfamiliar with government programs because the owners of these and managers of these companies are largely head-down leaders. They are very engaged in the day-to-day activities of their business, and as such, find it difficult to avail themselves of these resources, mainly because they have to search for them. That being said, there are two particular resources that are available that these companies do use on a large basis, and those two things are Section 179 accelerated depreciation and the R&D tax credit, both of which my company enjoys, and we use that money to reinvest in our business.
So, sir, I would ask you then, Mr. Hagopian, how would the Manufacturing.gov Act assist small and medium-sized manufacturers in terms of awareness of federal programs?
Yeah, so certainly we need a central repository where the information is easy to access and understand. And again, through our industry association, the National Tooling Machining Association, will assist government in promoting all of those benefits to the small and medium-sized enterprises.
Thank you. And this bill has already passed the Senate, and I hope that we can pass it here in the House as well to deliver on a bipartisan basis for our U.S. manufacturers. I'm going to switch gears now. As co-chair of the Congressional Horse Caucus and as one who worked with Chair Schakowsky with the ASBCA to develop our Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act, I'd like to provide or state my support for two vital bills to protect horses, the SAFE Act and the PAST Act. As we've heard, the SAFE Act would finally put in place a permanent federal ban to protect horses from slaughter. It is critical for the welfare of our equines, the sustainability of the equine industry, and the protection of horse owners across the country that we end this predatory practice for good. The PAST Act ends the failed system of industry self-policing on abusive soaring practices and strengthens enforcement measures for those caught continuing this horrible practice. It passed the House in 2019 on a bipartisan basis, as you all know, and I hope we'll be able to pass this into law this year. So, Ms. Kraska, can you tell us why it's so important to pass these two bills to protect our American equines and those equine athletes?
Thank you so much, Congressman Tonko, and you have been a real leader in this space, and we greatly appreciate everything that you've done for horses and the people who love them in this country. So I'm here, of course, representing an animal protection organization, the ASPCA, and from our perspective, both of these practices need to end because they're extremely cruel. But we're in the Consumer Protection Subcommittee, and one of the additional most important reasons that we need to pass both of these bills is because of the people that they impact in this country. The impact of this cruelty on industries, on horse owners, on the people who care about horses in this country. There are 38 million, self-described horse enthusiasts. That's a ton of people. And horse soaring and horse slaughter are both black eyes on the overall industry. And that's why we see so much industry support for passing these measures. We also know that these practices impact the entire equine community. They drive down participation in shows. They cause owners to be fearful of rehoming their horses, which has some really distressing negative externalities. They drive predatory behavior, practices like kill pen bailouts. And we know that there are even some individuals who will buy racehorses and then go back to their previous owners to try to extort them for funds before sending them to slaughter. So there's really no reason for these practices to exist anymore. That's why we need these bills.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your advocacy, and let's get it done. I've exhausted my time, Madam Chair. Again, wonderful happy birthday to you, and I hope you and Bob celebrate wickedly. So I yield back.
Well, I really want to express my real gratitude to the witnesses today. I think all of you did an extraordinary job of making your positions very clear, answering the questions. I want to remind members that pursuant to committee rules, they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record to be answered by the witnesses who have appeared today. And I ask each of the witnesses to respond as promptly as possible to questions that you are getting in writing. Would appreciate it so very, very much. Before I adjourn, I just wanted to, where is it? Okay, yes. Before we adjourn, I request unanimous consent. Well, first, let me see if there's anything that Mr. Bilirakis wanted to add before we adjourn about the hearing. The ranking member. Gus, you want to?
Well, I just want to tell you it was an extremely productive hearing. I appreciate it very much, Madam Chair. We learned a lot, very diverse amount of bills, and extremely informative. And I want to wish you again a very happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. I request unanimous consent now to enter the list of 47 documents as reviewed by Democratic and Republican staff into the record. Is there any objection? Hearing none, so ordered, and without objections, then we will enter that into the record. And with that, this wonderful hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.